make sense of what's happening.
We are doing this for our very survival.
What do you think a peace or a ceasefire or an end to this looks like?
And fully understand what's at stake.
We have will, we have guts, and we are fighting like hell.
Amanpour, tonight on CNN.
For World Sport, I'm Alex Thomas, and this is CNN.
News continues. Let's hand over to Laura Coates and CNN Tonight. Laura?
Anderson, thank you so much. I'm Laura Coates, and this is CNN Tonight. And as they say, with, 98 days to go into the midterm elections, which is like tomorrow or a long ways away, depending on how you view politics, it's election night in America once again. The polls are now closed in Michigan, in Kansas, and parts of Arizona. 5 states have primaries today, including key battlegrounds that could shape the race for which party will be the majority. Democrats once again, or Republicans yet again. No, Donald Trump is not on the ballot, that's true, but he is casting a pretty big shadow as he continues to endorse some. It's not always clear, I might add, who he is endorsing, but more on that in just a moment. And the timing is going to be pretty interesting here. I mean, it isn't just post-January 6th, it's post the first series of January 6th hearings, but to see whether it actually impacted voters and in which way it did. It hasn't seemed to impact the platforms, though, of candidates in several swing states. Some continue to echo the baseless fraud claims, and there's a whole slate of them in Arizona who are running for top positions like governor and attorney general, secretary of state, and Senate, consequential office holders for those who maybe are running elections. Also being closely watched, the Senate race in Missouri. Trump's endorsed an Eric. Okay, but which Eric did you mean to endorse, sir? Rivals Eric Greitens and Eric Schmidt, well, they both claim that Trump meant them. And Trump, for his part, really has yet to clarify. I mean, even now, on election night, and it seems to be causing a lot of chaos and some confusion into an already tumultuous race. Meanwhile, you got the fates of a trio of Republicans who voted to impeach then-President Trump over the insurrection. And their seats, well, they hang in the balance tonight. Let's get the latest from CNN's chief national correspondent and anchor of Inside Politics. John King is at the Magic Wall. Look, John, polls have already closed in Missouri. So what can you tell us about the race there?
One of the Erics, Laura, is leading in the Senate Republican primary. That would be the state attorney general, Eric Schmidt. Only about 4% of the vote counted, so we need to count a lot of votes tonight. But Eric Schmidt, one of the Erics, is leading with 40% of the vote, 41% if you round up. Congresswoman Vicky Hartzler in second with 27%. Eric Greitens, the former governor who resigned in disgrace and amid scandal, is running a distant third at the moment at 17.2%. But again, a long way to go in the vote count. You see a lot of yellow here. That's Congresswoman Hartzler. She's a Republican Congresswoman, Laura. This is about where her district is out here. Some of these counties are out of her district, these to the south, these to the east. But the chunk of them right here, that's her congressional district. So she's running strong at home, if you will. But a long way to go as we count the votes here. That we're even talking about this race is what is significant. And this is a Republican-held seat. Roy Blunt is retiring. Republicans should hold it in November. Democrats think it's possible, if Republicans have all that chaos you're talking about, it's possible to keep an eye on this one. But we'll keep counting votes.
I mean, who knew that the name Eric was the new Cher, John King? You only have one name now. That's the new thing. It's a new fad. I'm setting it up here. You also have 3 congressional Republicans who voted to impeach Trump. They're facing primary challenges tonight. How are things looking for them?
So let's bring up the state of Michigan, where we have some votes in one of those races. 2 of them are out in Washington State. We don't get those results till later. But right here, let me come right in here, just Grand Rapids, Michigan area right here. Again, results are early, only about 5% of the vote in. But Peter Meijer is the incumbent. He is one of 10 House Republicans who voted to impeach Donald Trump. Donald Trump has vowed to exact his vengeance on him. Trump endorsed John Gibbs, the challenger, who has 63% of the vote at the moment. You see a little about 1,000 votes ahead. Again, this is only 5% of the votes. So we have a long way to count. But as you watch this district fill in, Republicans around the country watching this tonight to see, even after the January 6th hearings, even after all this damning testimony from Donald Trump's own aides and allies about that he knew it was a lie, do Republicans still want to punish those who voted to impeach him? We'll keep counting.
John King, stay close. Glad to have you here. And here to help us pack all this in and put it all into perspective, our former Democratic Congresswoman Abby Finkenauer, also CNN senior political analyst Ron Brownstein, and former special assistant to George W. Bush, Scott Jennings. We've got Iowa, we've got California, we've got Kentucky. This is a focus group in and of itself. People pay to have these moments here. So let's talk about this moment here. First of all, I wonder, what does it say that Trump still casts this very large shadow. Are his endorsements really that impactful? I wonder sometimes, are we giving him too much credit? Do we overtalk about the influence he may have? I know the Eric thing is funny, but is it oversized?
I think it's most impactful in multi-candidate primaries. If you've looked where he's had the biggest amount of movement in candidacies, take Ohio, for example, where J.D. Vance was sort of at third or fourth place, and he came in late and I think delivered the nomination in Ohio to J.D. Vance. So in Missouri, he's endorsed one Eric or the other, or maybe both of them. And it's likely, I think, Schmidt will win. We'll see. We got a lot of votes yet to count. Don't want to over-speculate while we're counting them. But he'll obviously want to claim credit for that. Same thing in Arizona, multi-candidate field, and he obviously came in for Blake Masters. So I think he does cast a big shadow. It's most helpful in bigger primaries where you've got lots of candidates and people are trying to sort out. Because a lot of these, and Ron knows, you've run. In these big primaries.
And you've won, by the way. I'm going to give you the credit. You've run and you've won.
But in party primaries, a lot of the candidates all saying the same thing. Same issues, same talk. So when somebody comes in that people trust or think they trust and says, this is my person, it can make a big difference.
I have a very serious question for you, Ron. I want to know which Eric do we think he was endorsing? I mean, I have a full screen here. I think these are the different people who it possibly could be. And I'm wondering which of these people do you think? It must be, is it Eric Holder? Is it Eric Carr? It could be any one of them. Clapton?
Up there?
Eric Church is up there? We're doing them all.
He hedged his bets. The point.
I couldn't help it.
To Scott's point, I think looking at Trump's personal win-loss record is the wrong metric, because it's not only his tap on the shoulder, it's the fact that he has reconfigured the Republican coalition over these last 6 years in a direction that makes it more likely for Trump-style candidates to win. The party is more dependent on the kind of voters who respond to a Trump appeal, culturally conservative, non-urban, non-college, older, evangelical voters, and the kind of white-collar, culturally moderate, economically conservative voters have been drifting away from the party. So the entire baseline, I mean, it's not only who Trump is endorsing, it's who's endorsing him. There are very few candidates anywhere in the country that are running and saying the party has got to move away from him. And I know Scott and I have argued about this before. But the entire baseline has moved in a Trump direction. And that has implications not only for the primaries, but as we'll talk about in a minute, for the general elections as well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And what I'm thinking about is less his impact on these particular candidates and more so just his impact on the Republican Party and what it says now about the Republican Party, that these are who your people are. I mean, regardless of which Eric we're talking about in Missouri, they're both pretty terrible. I mean, they both believe the election was stolen. They believe, in conspiracies and lies, and they peddle them for their own personal gain. And that is who the Republican Party sadly is now.
On that point, I want to play what Kari Lake had to say about the idea of pushing the baseless claims. It's kind of a page out of what Trump said here, more than a year ago now, about the idea of, if I should lose, here's what happened.
The only way they can win is if they load up the voter rolls with dead people, people who've moved, and imaginary friends.
So when you hear that, of course, it's a bit of a deja vu. But the real issue to me as well, and Abby, this is your point about this is who the Republicans are. Yeah. I do wonder if that's going to backfire for Democratic voters or for Republican voters in the long run, because there was a time not too many years ago when it was, I need you to have a platform, and I'm going to go towards the platform, as opposed to I'm going to go towards not voting for someone in particular. And I wonder if the focus is consistently on, look, these are the Republicans, this is who they are, as opposed to Democrats. Are you going to talk about the economy? Are you going to talk about the issues that matter to people? I mean, is that a real concern?
Well, look, I mean, Democrats, you can have policy differences in a platform, but what we're talking about, when we're talking about the Republican Party platform, they're literally changing it, like in states in Arizona, where if you don't essentially believe that Trump won the election, you're not a Republican anymore. There is a very big difference there. And again, it is really horrifying to watch this continue to happen. And it's going to be on Democrats. Do we educate voters enough to talk about how extreme this is and where these folks have gone, because it's not attached to reality anymore. And that's a terrifying thing. We already have people in elected office who believe in these conspiracies, who are not attached to reality. And are we going to have more people like that elected? And what does that mean for the future of our democracy if they are?
I want to ask you, Scott, about reality, but you just told me that you have a pet pig now. So I'm not really, I don't know how tethered we are to reality in this moment in time, but it's real. But I'm giving you a hard time, but it's a cute story. But seriously, when I think about reality, I mean, is she right?
Well, I mean, my rebuttal to that is Republicans would argue that Democrats aren't tethered to reality on the economy. I mean, they're passing a bill right now in the Congress.
There's a difference
here. It says
Wait,
we're going to reduce. It says we're going to reduce Inflation Act. It doesn't reduce inflation. We've got tax increases now identifying as tax cuts or something. I mean, they're not tethered to reality on the issues that matter to most people.
We're
everything
talking
everything
about
she
democracy
just said,
here and just facts about an election. We're talking about facts here, not policy differences, just, you know, cold-hearted facts about an election.
You're not terribly familiar with my views on this. And there's a big difference, by the way, between Eric Schmidt and Eric Rice. But the reality is this election is about the economy.
Hold on. I want to hear all of you. It's important the audience says as well. But I want to, you poll in this all the time.
So
what is the reality in the polls?
Look, by most objective measures, this should be a very rough election for Democrats. The first midterm is always tough. 9% inflation has not been the case in 40 years. The president approval rating is 40%. There's a lot of headwinds working at Democrats. But I will say, as a declarative statement, if Democrats avoid the worst in November, especially in Senate and governor's races, it will be because of what we are seeing tonight, which is that Republicans have the potential to nominate too many candidates who simply are not good fits, can't compete, particularly in the white-collar suburbs that have been moving away from the party in 2018 and 2020. They have the potential to have a slate in Arizona and in Michigan that is going to be relatively easy to portray as extreme up and down. Now, they may get through anyway. I mean, the underlying current is such that some of these candidates who are out of the mainstream are probably going to win. But Republicans are making it much tougher on themselves than it might have been by nominating some of these candidates who I think are going to be very hard sells in places like Maricopa County, Oakland County, Michigan, the suburbs of Philadelphia. That is a consistent pattern, and it is linked to Trump's influence in the party.
Let me ask you, how does abortion rate in these conversations?
Very much. Is
it galvanizing? Is it fizzle out, you think? Look, even though it's a settled issue at this point?
But in these
Settled.
states, it is not settled.
Right.
And also, there's the issue of what's going to happen at the national level. No, there's no, like I said, if Democrats avoid the worst in November, it will be primarily, I think, principally because Republicans continue to lose ground in white-collar suburbs, and abortion is a big part of that. It's helping Democrats recapture. There were a lot of center-right, white-collar voters who voted for Biden in 20 because they didn't like Trump, have been disillusioned with Biden's performance, were open to Republicans, and are now moving back because of the confluence of issues like abortions, guns, January 6th, and the nature of some of these candidates.
Now do the Hispanic voters in Texas and Nevada, because you've got whole other blocks of the electorate that went for Democrats huge in 16, 18, and 20 that are moving towards the Republican Party. So you're right. We do have a realignment, but it doesn't all benefit the Democrats.
You're right. You're right.
I'm glad you validated him before he went back to California. That was a tender moment. Do you feel that was nice? That was a nice moment. Ron Brownstein, thank you. Everyone, Scott, Abby, stick with us. We'll be right back. There are brand new developments tonight on missing text messages sent on or around January 6th. Go figure. But not from Secret Service phone members. No. Why were phones wiped of key Pentagon officials? Yes, it's true. CNN First is next.
Across Africa, businesses are working together like never before. All new on CNN, Connecting Africa.
Join me and Lenny Jokos as we crisscross the continent to show you how new connections are revolutionizing commerce in Africa. This month, Connecting Africa through infrastructure.
When we develop the infrastructure, it will contribute to the country's GDP.
Connecting Africa on CNN, in association with Afreximbank.
have you heard it like this?
Let's untangle the players and political forces.
Fast-paced news from the perspective of The Global Brief with Bianca Nobilo. Tonight on CNN.
Out front tonight, a potential breakthrough in treating coronavirus.
We've gotten very little help from the federal government.
Could all this spending lead to a bigger economic crisis? One of our viewers saw you last night on the show. She says she's going to pay your rent this month. Shut up. I want to go now to an incredible story of survival. Would you do it all again in terms of being a nurse, knowing that that could put you at risk for this?
I want to help people more than I ever have.
Erin Burnett out front on CNN.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson.
It all starts here. Changing, fighting, creating, connecting. That's why we're here. We live here, we work here, we're from here, and we'll go wherever the story takes us.
I'm Becky Anderson in Tehran.
We are in Jerusalem. Real news that shapes our world. Exploring not just what's going on, but why. I just want to press you on one further point. Getting perspective on this region from this region. Places that many of us know, but few of us get to see. Observing countries on the move, still rooted in tradition. It all starts here, and that's why we're here, bringing you the world from our Middle Eastern hub.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson, today on CNN.
There is nowhere in Lysychansk that's safe.
Let me show you what the scene looks like. It's absolutely obliterated. The force of that blast blowing out windows.
President Putin has been sending this message. He can hit this country anywhere, anytime.
Farmers are still working, even with the threat of Russian artillery that could land here.
Ukraine's message, please send more weapons.
The trail of deleted January 6th texts, well, they now stretch all the way to the Pentagon. CNN was first to report on court documents showing that phones of several key Trump aides were apparently wiped at the end of the administration. Now, we know specifically Secretary of Defense Chris Miller, former Chief of Staff Kash Patel, and former Secretary of the Army Ryan McCarthy were among the officials whose phones were wiped. All are considered key witnesses to January 6th. DOD is just the latest department unable to suddenly find text messages from that day. We know the texts of multiple Secret Service agents were also deleted. Homeland Security also can't seem to find texts of the acting secretary and his top deputy. That's in addition to a 7-hour gap in the White House call logs. Same for the White House diary on January 6th. Well, then there are the reports of documents being burned by the White House Chief of Staff. Flushed documents found clogging the White House toilet, or torn up so that they had to be taped back together, preferably not after they were in the toilet, because I would feel bad for the person to do that. But you know, boxes of classified documents were also sent to Mar-a-Lago instead of where they're supposed to be sent. It's called the National Archives. I'm joined now by a digital forensic investigator, Gary Kessler, who I'm glad to speak with right now. Gary, I'm so glad you're here because while people are wondering where these messages have gone and, oh, they're just gone, they've gone poof into the ether, I'm always wondering, is there a way to get it back? Are these really gone or are they gone for now? Because when you delete a text message, they don't really go away fully, right?
Well, it depends how efficiently the wiping was done, if in fact wiping is the correct term. So on a cell phone, as you just observed with your question, if all you do is delete a message, then the message is somewhere still on the phone. And even if it's not accessible to the user of the text message app, for example, there's still fragments and snippets of the message, again, probably somewhere on the phone, although they can be difficult to find unless you have the right tools. Now, on the other hand, if they truly wiped the phone, the most effective way to do that is, of course, Android phones and iPhones for the last at least 5 years. The operating systems are automatically encrypted, and there's a decryption key in the system area of the memory of the phone. So the most effective way to wipe all the user data is go into the system area and delete the decryption key, And then it doesn't matter what's in the user area, it's never going to be retrievable.
So what you've described would have to be an intentional act. Is that a common thing to have done? Would somebody, is it more likely in the work that you've done that people are just sort of deleting it on their phone thinking, you know, they can't actually see it? Is it difficult to go in the wiping as you're talking about? And do you know if that's what's normally done in the course of a change in administration?
Well, I can't speak at all to what the administration might do. In the work that I've done, when usually you have somebody who is not terribly sophisticated, and they're just deleting messages, and very frequently we can get them back either from the phone or we can get them back from, say, an iTunes backup or a cloud backup or something like that. If in fact I want to reissue a phone, and that's been one of the comments that's been made, you would possibly want to wipe the phone so that no remnants of the old user continue on with the new user. And so, yes, it's a deliberate act in that it's purposeful. It is not necessarily a nefarious action.
That's an important distinction, and we should note that we don't have information yet that this is somehow nefarious. But the idea of sort of the details of how one were to do this, I think, is fascinating, because just the idea of deleting it versus wiping is going to be the key inquiry going forward. Gary Kessler, thank you for your expertise.
Thank you.
I want to turn now to Miles Taylor, who was Chief of Staff at Homeland Security during the Trump administration, and also Elliot Williams, who served at both the DOJ and the DHS. So Miles, Elliot, he made a good moment there. The idea of, look, just because you delete it doesn't mean it's nefarious or wiping it. It could be a part of the course of things. However, this sort of notion of all these coincidences, I mean, at some point, if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, I mean, quack, quack. So where are we right now?
Look, we all know this. If you delete a text message, it's kind of a sketchy behavior. So that right away is a red flag. And when I just heard him speaking, I mean, what stood out to me is that we were talking about wiping, you were talking about flushing things, you know, down the toilet. One thing is clear, in the Trump administration, there was not good preservation of records. It's clear procedures weren't followed, and this is a problem. However, I will caveat this by saying, when I saw the news about DOD today, I started to think that this is less a big criminal conspiracy and more a culture of incompetence. Absolutely. You have these senior officials who turn in their phones, they kind of just wipe them, they put them away. The presidential records provisions have not kept up with the 21st century. I'm actually more interested not in the text messages of these senior officials, but in their depositions. What were these people doing? And we need to start interviewing them and getting those records. Also, has anyone asked for their personal phones? I knew a lot of people in government used their personal phones for this. And Elliot, I'd be interested in your take on whether they're asking for their personal text
And
messages.
it's an official record if you're conducting government business on your personal phone. Look, it's not just incompetence, but this idea, and we would have both seen it at the Department of Homeland Security. A lot of these folks believe they are the men on the wall saving America from tyranny and utter ruin. And the idea that investigators from Congress or the Justice Department can go poking around your emails or your text messages is just offensive to them. And so, of course, we're going to delete our things. Now, the problem is, for it to be a crime, there has to be an investigation. There's got to be, you know, a subpoena or something like that. And as of January 6th, on that day, criminal investigations hadn't really been opened yet. And so it's, you know, you're going to have a hard time right now, based on the information we have, charging any of those folks with obstruction of justice.
I mean, that's true, yeah. and I note that. But the same token, I feel like there's something odd about a moment where most people were watching, and it was essentially like frozen, like almost like a mosquito in amber. Watching Jurassic Park. The idea of thinking about that, and those are the days that you don't think to preserve. I mean, I want to play for you what the Attorney General Merrick Garland had to say about this issue. He was asked about whether he was concerned about the missing messages. Here's what he had to say.
Are you concerned about the missing text, though? I mean, is that something that's not?
I don't want to talk about particular cases. With respect to our own investigations, we will pursue all facts as far as we need to pursue them, and we'll pursue them with all the tools we have under the criminal law.
So one of those tools, of course, are the inspectors general.
Yeah.
I mean, at this point, I'm not always focused, although I'm a prosecutor, I'm not always focused on the only end game is criminal prosecution. Sometimes it's the investigation to find out what happened of things. How do you feel about the IGs overlooking at this right now?
Oh, so heads need to roll, let's be clear. Even if people aren't charged with crimes. Individuals have been fired or resigned from their jobs for far less than this. I think it was 2012, the head of the General Services Administration, GSA, resigned because they used government funds to hire a clown. Literally, and this is far more nefarious and terrible than
Well,
that.
Miles is afraid of clowns, and so it's now triggering.
Hired a couple. Let's not make it about clowns.
Look, let's not make it about clowns. I'm conflicted about clowns. They make me happy, but I'm a little frightened of them too. But needless to say, you can lose your job for that. You ought to lose your job for overseeing the possible destruction of evidence.
But I got to key into something that Elliot said earlier. Again, if on your personal device you sent an official communication, then that official
Well, what does that mean,
communication should
official
be preserved.
communication? Like,
well,
does that
let's
mean
think back
I'm
in
talking
time.
to a colleague
What
or
did
what?
Hillary Clinton get knocked for years and years and years? The emails. Why were they knocking her for the emails? Because they were on a private email address. The thing that I think, in fact, I've heard no one talking about this yet, is I know some of these government officials were conducting official business via text messages because it's what they used to do during the administration.
Let me send this Word document to my personal email so I can work on it at home. That becomes a government record even if you're using your Gmail.
But does that mean the entire phone becomes the record that can be obtained validly by the government, or does that mean the record itself? Because that's is it text by text will go through? Is it page by page? And if everything's gone already, how do you begin?
It's a great question. Look, it was widespread practice in that administration to use encrypted message apps to communicate. People were using that. I'm not saying that we know for sure that senior officials during January 6th were doing that. All I'm saying is that, if people are really worried about private email being used for official business, text messages, which we're looking at now, absolutely were between senior officials, and that should be something that is probed in this instance.
Look,
go ahead.
Look, it might be lawful, but it's awful. Literally, it's conduct, and to use a cute little catchphrase, but it's conduct that even if you can't be charged with a crime for it, even if maybe you can't lose your job for it, our government should not be engaged in. Full stop.
Awful and lawful. Your new bumper
Look
sticker.
at that.
I mean, we covered clowns. We've got a whole thing. We're rhyming now. This is a beautiful Tuesday. It's Tuesday, right? It's election night in America. Of course it's Tuesday. You weren't listening to John King. Miles Taylor, thank you. Elliot, stick with us as well. Up ahead, one of the country's most popular music festivals has just been canceled. Music Midtown in Atlanta called off this year in a decision likely linked to gun laws. We'll take on the controversy with the president of the Atlanta City Council next.
I believe we have an opportunity to move towards hope because we are learning more about this criminal enterprise. My name is Lisa C. Williams. I'm a philanthropist and an advocate for survivors of human trafficking. When I look back over 22 years of when I first started working in this space, I was simply trying to find safe shelter for girls who were 10 and 11 years old who were being bought and sold on our streets. One of the things that I remember very vividly, it was a turning point in our fight for Rachel's Law, is the CNN special, Children for Sale. It took something like that documentary that was hosted by Jada Pinkett Smith to wake up people and for them to want to look at it and understand what we were saying to them. And that just gave us momentum. And we took that film and we took it all over Georgia, and we galvanized people around a movement that we call the I Am Rachel movement to tell them about the safe harbor law that we were trying to get passed. And 83% of Georgians said, we agree that children are children and not the criminals.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
fundamentally, the world is changing very rapidly because of technology and globalization, and people need to learn new skills. And if they do, there's a wide range of new opportunities for new jobs if people get skilled up. So we think this is going to persist far beyond the pandemic. There's a lot of interest for individuals coming directly to Coursera Online to take professional certificates, to learn the skills, to get new digital careers. But the other thing that we're seeing is that businesses are realizing that embracing technology, going digital, moving to the cloud, using AI makes them more competitive. And so businesses are upskilling their employees using Coursera. And now, post-pandemic, universities and colleges all around the world, even as students come back to campus, they're realizing that integrating online learning into the way that students learn is a great way to provide flexibility and also access to emerging skills.
I'm Blake Essig in Tokyo, and this is CNN.
Fall Out Boy, My Chemical Romance, Future, and Jack White. Those are just a few of the headline performances that tens of thousands of music fans had hoped to see at next month's iconic Music Midtown Festival in Atlanta. Organizers, however, abruptly called the event off just yesterday, citing circumstances beyond their control. No more details were offered, but sources say that Georgia's gun laws are what's to blame. There's one law in particular that allows firearms to be permitted in public spaces, and that includes parks, I might add, which gun advocates say conflicts with the festival's weapons ban. Joining me now is Doug Shipman, president of the Atlanta City Council. Doug, thank you for being here this evening. For people maybe just learning about this for the first time, it's quite the intersection between what the gun laws are doing and saying and the impact possibly on entertainment, on the economy. What's the issue here? That the festival, a private entity, wanted to ban weapons and the Georgia laws said, nope, bring the weapons. You're entitled to do so in a public space. Is that it?
So we've had consistent laws that have been opening up the access to guns, the ability to carry guns in various spaces. There was a 2019 Georgia Supreme Court ruling that basically said on private property and on long-term leased public property, you could have weapons restrictions, but on public property, you could not. And so in this case, the music festival doesn't have a long-term lease. It's there for a couple of days to have the event. And there was a concern that there would be legal jeopardy because of the restrictions against any restrictions on public spaces.
And they can't contract away that requirement or that ability to bring it in. They can't say as part of like an entertainer's rider, look, there can't be weapons, that's enough to trump this?
So I came out of the entertainment industry before I was in elected office. There are often riders from artists. There are also insurance issues related to security plans. And I said those things did not have any impact on the state law. And this state law has been written in a way that limits local officials from being able to make more restrictive laws. So in essence, the state has said, we're going to make the law and you can't change it at the local level. There's one other issue here. More recently, this year, we also have a permitless carry law that passed in Georgia. So the proliferation of those who can carry without a license, without training, has expanded. So also the fact that you couldn't have a restriction on weapons, also in a situation where we know there are more guns that people are carrying around naturally, I think led to a lot of questions around liability.
I mean, it's hard to think about this in a vacuum, right? We know what happened in that horrible, tragic Las Vegas shootings that took place. There was a music festival going on. There were concerts happening. So there is the natural concern that one would obviously think of. And there's also the economic notion here. I mean, the cancellation, it means a $50 million loss, they believe, to the Atlanta economy, according to some reports about this. It was supposed to take place next month. It featured 30+ artists. It was going to host local food venues. What is the impact of this economically? And does this forebode harsher conditions going forward in the sense that this might make people say, well, let's not go to Atlanta? I mean, even the North Carolina governor just tweeted out in response to what's going on, he tweeted out a reaction to this very notion saying, come on up to North Carolina. We're ready to welcome you to one of our amazing outdoor spaces to help you host a fun and safe festival. When you see this and what it could mean for the economy and for businesses or entertainment going elsewhere, what's your reaction?
It is a major concern. There was a study done a few years ago that you cited $20 million in direct spending, $30 million in indirect economic impact. This festival hosted 50,000 people a day for 2 days. We know that people come nationally for it. It's a major festival that's been going on for 25 years, but it's not the only one. We have a festival called Shaky Knees that happens in another park. We have one called Sweetwater 420 Fest that happens in another park. And so this may not be the only festival that can no longer happen in a public space. They might be able to find a private space, but we don't have a large outdoor private space that really makes sense like some other cities. And so it may have to move out of the city. And so these economic ramifications are significant in big dollars, but they're also, as you pointed out, very significant on small businesses, a lot of locally owned food trucks, small businesses, folks connected to our music industry, which is a very vital part of what we do, will be impacted. And I would say one more thing, and the tweet that you pointed out, we know we're always in competition with other cities like Austin and Miami, Nashville, for music and for economic development more broadly. And I do have a concern that people are going to maybe not even bring new things that could be coming here because of what they're seeing. So I think the economic ramifications could be quite extensive and could be much larger than just the Midtown music cancellation.
But will it shape policy? I mean, I wonder, are you hearing from your constituents and the voters and the electorate more broadly in Georgia in reaction to this? Has there been some backlash in resulting this?
Well, this festival is really focused on young people, but it's also one that a lot of us have attended over the years who have been in Atlanta. It's really one of those memory maker kinds of moments. So I have been hearing from folks that are quite upset. We do have an election here for state legislature, governor, other constitutional offices. So I'm hopeful that no matter who's elected next January, when our state legislature comes back into session, that we'll really look at the implications of this policy, whether it was an intended or an unintended consequence. Clearly, there are economic implications. And so there are ways. We know we have gun restrictions in airports and stadiums and other private venues. We certainly could have a carve out for ticketed events, for large events, for music festivals. I hope that we'll look at those policies because this is going to damage the Atlanta economy going forward. No question about it.
I wonder if it's going to be the blueprint, too, for other states who may have similar conflicts and for entertainers to think about that, where they choose to go, and, of course, where they spend their money, and, of course, the overarching concern of safety at the core. Doug Shipman, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Look, it's now tomorrow in Taiwan. We're going to take you live to the other side of the world for the very latest on the storm over House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's historic visit. China is still threatening retaliation. An update on the flaring tensions will be next.
I'm Selena Wang in Beijing, and this is CNN.
I am Fahad Hamiduddin, the CEO of the Saudi Tourism Authority. I think if you think of travelers in today's life They want to immerse in what's authentic. I think people are less looking for, the same old in every place, and they want what is authentic. And I believe that's on us. There are strong commitments that Saudi Arabia is making, like committing to 30% of its land to remain reserves, to rewilding over 21 species, including the Arabian leopard. Or when it's designing its new projects like the Red Sea Project, we're keen to make sure that regenerative tourism sits at the heart of our master planning and product design.
This is a really important story. My name's Clarissa Ward. I work for CNN.
Assalamu alaikum.
Day in, day out, you see the reality of people living through this.
Ничего страшного.
This is the front line. On a human level, you find courage, sacrifice. This is what life is about.
A lot of people are wondering why.
You see the worst of humanity.
Putin might use a nuclear weapon. Absolutely terrifying.
But you also see the best of humanity. My job is to be present.
The human cost is right here.
And to tell these stories.
We're talking about families.
That is the most important thing.
I'm Clarissa Ward in Ukraine.
This
is
CNN.
Just minutes ago, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi gave a historic address before Taiwan's parliament. She's now meeting with Taiwan's president. And in making this trip, Pelosi defied hesitation from the White House and also threats of retaliation from China. In her address, Pelosi spoke of America's friendship with Taiwan, and she pledged more cooperation. Here with you now with more is CNN senior international correspondent Will Ripley, who's always on the story. Tell us what you know.
Well, we are just, like everybody else, watching very closely to see how Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, second in line to the U.S. presidency, is received here in Taiwan. And so far, it has been a very warm welcome, even though the Taiwanese government was pretty much radio silence before her plane landed. Once it did, Taipei 101 lit up with a welcome message. As you said, she's meeting with President Tsai Ing-wen. She's also had a chance to meet earlier with members of Taiwan's parliament, where she gave a speech, and she talked about the reasons why she's here, and really in stark contrast to what we're seeing right now from mainland China with these military exercises happening just off the shore. Listen.
Come in friendship to Taiwan. We come in peace for the region. And our chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee, Mr. Takano, representing our veterans, understanding the value of peace and the avoidance of conflict.
Pelosi made it very clear that the reason why she's here is to show solidarity with the island of Taiwan, which has been under an increasing amount of intimidation, both militarily, diplomatically, and economically from mainland China, Laura.
There's been a lot of conversation around that trip, as you well know, and there was that piece she wrote in the Washington Post as well, talking about why she was there. But you mentioned the flight, and we see images of her, landing. And speaking of that flight, there's some new reporting that CNN has about that flight to Taiwan. What did you learn?
Yeah, I mean, that's a flight that I've taken myself, and normally if you're flying the normal direct route, it's only about 4.5 hours. It's at least under a 5-hour flight for sure, and that's how long it would normally take. But Speaker Pelosi's flight took more than 7 hours, according to CNN reporting, and the reason for that is they were trying to avoid potentially this. I don't know if we have the map handy or not, but the 6 locations around the island of Taiwan where there are military drills that have been taking place since the overnight hours here shortly after Speaker Pelosi arrived. These military drills, some of them so close to the shore that it's possible that people living along the coast could actually hear them. And certainly if anybody were to try to head out in the water a little bit closer to these drills, they'd find a large amount of activity, which is very, provocative, certainly, especially because some of these drills, the coordinates that they were released by the People's Liberation Army might have actually gone into Taiwan's territorial airspace. Now, we don't know if that has happened. We don't know if that's going to be publicized by the Taiwan military and the Defense Department if it does happen, because, they certainly don't want to dial up the tension here, and they've actually been uncharacteristically quiet when talking about these latest provocations, even though usually, Laura, they tell us, 2 times a day how many planes have flown into Taiwan's self-declared air defense identification zone. But I think the strategy from the Taiwan side is to keep everything as low-key as possible, even while they try to show Nancy Pelosi around, and hope that the experiences that she has here she'll take back to Washington, and they'll help shape American policy if and when the time comes that China does make a military move on Taiwan.
Well, they may be uncharacteristically quiet, but you know who is not, and that's Speaker Pelosi. I hope that she addresses the idea of why there was the diversion, if there's a broader issue at stake. Will Ripley, thank you so much. We'll be right back.
I am Nigerian by blood, British by birth, and American by residence. It is important to me that those same strands of inclusivity that flow through me are mirrored in the stories that we tell. One World is a place where Africa has an equal seat at the global table alongside Europe, the Americas, and Asia. Every continent has a voice, and where everyone watching has a stake in the global conversation.
One World with Zain Asher, tonight on CNN.
We share this place, we all belong.
Look, they don't call her Queen Bee for nothing. Beyonce's new album, Renaissance, is already breaking chart records, but it's also buzzing with controversy. A song on the album called Heated is being criticized for including an ableist slur. Listen. Disability rights activists say the word spaz, which was used in that particular lyric, is offensive towards people living with spastic cerebral palsy. According to the CDC, people with spastic cerebral palsy have increased muscle tone. This means their muscles are stiff, and as a result, their movements can be awkward. A rep for Beyonce tells CNN she's updating the song. The word, saying, quote, "The word not used intentionally in a harmful way will be replaced." Abby, Elliott, and Scott are back with me right now, and I should say the person most excited to talk about Beyonce is Scott Jennings in an odd revelation of sorts. But I bring this up because, look, and it can be uncomfortable at times to talk about the things that people react to, that have visceral reaction, that can lead to what we know as the so-called cancel culture of things. And Lizzo just changed a lyric as well. It's not unheard of for people to be enlightened that the use of a term is offensive and to no longer use it. But I think you put it best, Elliott, the idea of, look, sometimes you get the information, you realize that it's offensive, and what you do then is up to you.
Yeah, no, I agree. Language evolves over time. Oh, okay, I'm going to give you the floor for a moment.
I'm listening. Yeah, you had a smirk. We knew you were like, tell me more.
Ready to pounce on this. No, I want to hear you defend the thought police. I'm not defending the thought police. Okay, well, let me use a better example for you. The state song of Kentucky, My Old Kentucky Home, for 130 years had the word darkies in it. Until, over time, people realized this is not language that we in a civil society ought to be using, and they changed it. And I think there ought to be room for people to recognize that, you know what, I've grown my whole life saying the word spaz, but maybe that's not language that we ought to be using. It doesn't take anything away from any of us to purge the word spaz from our vocabulary. You can still use most of the English language. So my question is, how are you affected by it?
Well, I think we're all affected when people who are creative artists, Beyonce, one of the most renowned artists in our culture, one of the most talented people alive today, when they have to go around policing their artistic expression because they might possibly offend a handful of people. I'm not denigrating these people that have the disease. I don't, not at all. But it's obvious she was not intending to hurt, harm, or offend anyone. And I'm just saying, when you start bending over for the speech police on one small issue, the floodgates are open. And how are you going to have artists expressing themselves if they're constantly calibrating against these people who are sort of professionally being offended by everything?
Abby, what's your thought?
You know, I hate calling it the speech police here. What we're talking about are, disability advocates. And when you look at where the term comes from, spastic cerebral palsy, I think there are a lot of folks who don't understand that or even know where that comes from. But now that you do, and you're hearing from these advocates, we should listen, right? And we should have respect for that. Heck, you watch, there are so many things that you look back and go, oh man, that didn't age well. Even something like Gilmore Girls, right? Like the first season of that, you have Rory using the R word and just very nonchalantly. And I watch that now and I go, oh my goodness, this should not be happening, but it did, because once you learned, right, what that word meant and why it was offensive, you took it out of our vocabulary. And I think, again, kudos to the disability community who continues to actually lift this up and explain what it is, because I think right now we're on CNN talking about spastic cerebral palsy when I think a lot of folks didn't even realize what it was.
I think this is where the American left is failing.
Right.
Because they are speaking a language and they are thinking about things in a way that most people in America don't even recognize. And this idea that we're going to go around and nitpick they're trying to cancel Beyonce. For goodness sakes.
Well, this
is where the left is falling short in connecting with the American people.